A follower just asked, Eric, what is the most dangerous thing about Trump? I would say it's his brazenness. Brazenness is a bold defiance of propriety, and it's a lack of shame. Brazenness is at the root of the threat that Trump brings to the table. There's many other awful things about Trump, but the real weapon he has is his brazenness. Brazenness is what makes him a weapon of democratic destruction, like no one's seen before in America. Brazenness is a defining characteristic of Trump. What I mean by that, when you see someone like Laura Loomer or white supremacists or Mark Robinson who have no sense of decency, you immediately think, oh, that's like Trump. That's what I mean by a defining characteristic. And in the right setting, when people actually crave a bold defiance of propriety, this characteristic of brazenness is incredibly dangerous. Because ultimately, and I want to give credit to Jonathan Last at the Bulwark for this, the guardrails of democracy and civil rights ultimately come down to people. People, people, people. People whose job it is to protect you. And people can be intimidated. The people who protect us hold jobs, and they want to keep those jobs so they can pay their mortgage and raise their kids. Then suddenly their nefarious boss is pressuring them to do something terrible. And then they ask themselves, well, what if I don't do it? I'm going to get kicked out on it, and it's going to ruin my life. What if I do it? Well, as the Germans used to say, worst case, I'm just following orders, right? And that's the mentality. Most of these people are easy to sway with the threat of being fired or through other forms of intimidation. So a brazen, authoritarian personality like Trump is extremely dangerous. They'll push all pressure points possible to get their way. They know no bounds. Especially if he has no shame in the process. He'll threaten jobs, families, use other means of persecution, prosecution, intimidation. Trump is his own cartel. Unfortunately, most people didn't sign up to be heroes and can be coerced and pressured into doing the wrong thing by a brazen and intimidating personality. And that's how you destroy a democracy, from within. And that's why Trump is such an enormous threat to America, because of exactly the brazenness that MAGA loves him for. We are now in a setting where brazenness is incredibly dangerous. In normal times, Trump's brazenness would have been laughed off stage, and he might have gotten 3% of the vote, right? Why are we in this situation now, where people are embracing brazenness? It's partly because of the liberals' own fault, the liberals' own mistake of pushing the politically correct agenda too far and alienating too many people. And now MAGA loves brazenness in part because it lets them own the liberals. It's the opposite of the politically correct agenda that the libs were pushing. But the MAGAs then took it too far the other way. The problem is that MAGA celebrated dropping all standards of decent behavior as their agenda, along with the PC standards that they were dropping. They celebrate crossing the line as an end in itself for the entertainment value of pushing the libs' buttons. But that's not taking politics seriously. It's very dangerous to join ranks just to feel good that you're all against something without also clearly analyzing what you're actually for. Politics is a life and death serious thing. It requires thinking in principles, not just sticking your tongue out at your opponent so you can feel good about yourself in the moment. This is life and death stuff. The problem is that MAGAs have become a mob caught up in the anti-lib vibe. And that's how the atrocities of mobs get started. It's all just emotion. It's all just a professional wrestling match for tribal entertainment value. MAGA has taken the evil of identity politics from the liberals, but then they've perfected it by letting their counter-identity politics rule them to the point of binding them to a dictator. So MAGA has embraced Trump's willingness to do anything shameful that normal, decent people would never consider. They've become myopic to the danger of a dictator in America. Plenty of crappy politicians in history have wanted to further their own agendas, but none of them had the brazen shamelessness to, for example, try to stop the peaceful transfer of power over a 2-month period like Trump did. That is Clear indicator of brazen dictatorial intent. But MAGA still doesn't see it. They still don't get it. In their right mind, they might see it. They might see Trump's threat, but they can't let themselves see it because he's their hammer against the libs. And that's all they're caring about. I don't think MAGA really understands the reality of an actual dictatorship. It's not correct to conflate dictatorship with big government. It's not the same thing. Their defense often is that big government is a bigger threat than Trump, that big government is itself equal to dictatorship. That's not true. I am also against big government. I'm for small government, but you equivocate if you think it's the same as dictatorship. Big government is bad, in my opinion, but it's not the same as jailing or torturing or threatening families of people who dissent in their opinions, jailing people who criticize the leader, or jailing for any reason the dictator wants, just because they looked at him funny or didn't show enough respect. That's real oppression. That's true boot on your neck oppression. When a dictator seizes the levers of power enough to make your day-to-day existence fearful. Real dictatorship is being at the whim of one individual in power, an individual who has no competition, that checks his power, nothing and no one that he has to appeal to, with no debate possible and no civil protections any longer. Don't equivocate big government with dictatorship. The majority of American citizens have never experienced real dictatorship. Frankly, MAGA doesn't know what it's playing with when it's courting brazenness for the mere entertainment value of owning the libs. They're having a good time playing with gas and fire. They're unleashing a weapon of democratic destruction. They're unleashing actual dictatorship, which they don't fear enough because they've never actually lived under it. They're like spoiled children who are throwing a tantrum and can't see the bigger picture, the adult picture, the bigger threat. I also want to mention a corollary threat of Trump's brazenness. It's his brazen attack on truth. It's his brazen destruction of objectivity itself. Someone less brazen couldn't have continued to tell 20 lies a day for 8 years in the public eye. Because of Trump's brazenness, we've come to take lies and falsehoods for granted in a way we never would have 10 years ago, pre-Trump. There's not even the expectation of decency or being held accountable for truth. It used to be that a single lie on camera, even as a politician, could be a career-ending embarrassment. Not anymore. Trump's changed all that. He's debased objectivity itself. The erosion of truth and objectivity over the past 8 years has a pernicious and lasting effect on society. It reduces people to tribalism. Since there's no objective truth, we can only listen to the tribe that we trust and are loyal to. We can't reason or agree on anything anymore, so we need a dictator to make the other side agree with us, agree with our tribe. Hannah Arendt mentioned this phenomenon. I'll paraphrase her. Quote, "This constant lying is not aimed at making the people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and judge, is completely subjected to the rule of lies. With such a people, you can do whatever you want." Trump's brazenness, his destruction of objectivity, his debased and depraved hate-mongering is all what makes him the perfect storm against democracy, the perfect foobar situation for our country, or any country. I just wish it wasn't happening to what I think is the greatest country that ever existed, a country based on the ideals of rationality and freedom. It's gross. It's just gross. And I don't know how the United States, not to mention the Republican Party, ever recovers from this Trump virus to anything resembling decency again, especially if Trump wins in November. I'm not a Democrat, but there is no Republican Party left. Trump destroyed it. The only hope we have is voting for Harris. The only hope is voting for country over party. Vote to continue the ideal of the American experiment over what is actually not even your party anymore. Trump destroyed it. I disagree with Harris about many things, But it can all be worked out later, because at least we will still have a democracy where we can still try to reason things out in debate rather than force things through violence, intimidation, and mob insurrection. A democracy is basically where we can still at least appeal to reason instead of resorting only to power and force. Even when things don't work out our way, there's still a mechanism for change without coups or violence or a dictator's whims. Above all else, we must keep the mechanism of democracy. And if I can say it, at least some semblance of civilized decency.